Rahubat family. Um, so in today's PowerPoint presentation, I'm going to be introducing the foundation of Nuapu. Um, and in the presentation, you guys will see how it came about from reading the Holy Tablets and how it's structured. And also, um, basically, you'll get a gist of one of the most profound bodies of literature ever created within inside of the Nuwaubian doctrine. Now, I want to say this before I get started. Um, Being as though a lot of cultures or a lot of religions who have, well established doctrines for hundreds of years, thousands of years, and so on and so forth, that I've, through my research, encountered, I noticed that all of them had a foundation that they taught to their newcomers as they came in. If anybody know a little bit about our nation, the Nuwaubian nation, they'll know that we started from Ansar Sufi Islam um, as being a part of the Mahdi movement of Sudan. And in the Islamic doctrine, we always had a structure because Islam already, has been long established with that particular structure. And one of the purposes I feel that a structure is needed is so that the learning precedes in steps in a, comprehensive form or fashion where people can pretty much understand exactly the basics of what they need to know to be integrated into the culture of whatever it is that they choose to practice. So this presentation will be introducing you to that particular foundation. There's two more presentations that's not included that, you know, basically completes the foundation, but it would have been too long, so I pretty much just stopped it at a certain point, and I'll go ahead and present those presentations at a later date. All right, so let's get started. So this first slide says the Imperial Order, the School of Messiah al-Mahdi. And the reason why I titled this slide in this way is because I noticed that in my growing up in the community, because I was born and raised in SAR under the teachings of the master teacher Baba Yanun, that as time went on through Pops's abduction and incarceration, that the foundation actually got lost. So I wanted to put together a organization that concentrated on the advocacy of bringing that foundation to the forefront, seeing as though with the many scrolls that the master teacher has written for us, I found through my walk as a student teacher of the master teacher that a lot of people were confused about the writings, either because they were in a situation to where they had to actually learn on their own. So say, for example, they purchase a book and they have no type of teacher to guide them as to what things within inside of whatever scrolls that they purchased meant, or the instructors that were giving them the information, disseminating our teachings to them, were not really clear and comprehensive in their dissemination of the teachings. So I put together a brotherhood of brothers that I grew up with, and we call it the Imperial Order. And it's pretty much a Nuwaubian brotherhood that focuses on the fundamental teachings of Nuapu. My name is Messiah Nanortha Naya Al Mahdi. That is my birth name. But I usually shorten it to Messiah Al Mahdi. So let's jump right to it. Introduction. I, Messiah Al Mahdi, am the Supreme Grand Commander of the Imperial Order, the sacred Nuwaubian Brotherhood, founded and organized by none other than myself for the purpose of preserving our sacred Nuwaubian culture. This pamphlet is being written to bring forth supreme enlightenment to those who wish to know what we of the Imperial Order believe, stand on, and live by. I will address various terms that we of the Imperial Order have made a common use of so that it could be understood by all how we relate to the doctrine and practice of our sacred culture. For many years, under the teachings of Dr. Malachi York, His method of raising our awareness was based on teaching us as his students how to debate the various different monotheistic religions by using logic and reason. However, we of the order contend that those days of learning from that method was only for student teachers to learn how to disseminate the doctrine being called at that time Nuapu. Section 1, Lesson 1. Introduction to the foundation of Nuapu called Tanweeb. Once we as a community left those schools and inherited our true racial spiritual identity called NUWAUBIAN, there was no need to continue to metamorphose, being we had by that time been thoroughly trained to properly teach and defend our doctrine. The only thing that our culture did not have was a systematic foundation to teach newcomers our culture and the core basic teachings of our doctrine. We had all the knowledge we needed to show and prove that religion is a spell and how to break it. We had a plethora of books called scrolls that taught us how to explain the fact versus fiction of the three monotheistic religions. And for ourselves, we had a complete culture with a racial identity, nationality, a national flag, a national language, a culture / spiritual doctrine called Nuapu, and our own sacred text, the holy tablets, and a constitution. So in this slide, what I'm pretty much outlining is once when we came from being Ansar Pure Sufi, Ansar Allah, Nubian Islamic Hebrews, Ancient Mystic Order of Melchizedek, and so on and so forth, when the master teacher started to give us right knowledge, sound right reasoning, the spiritual science of Nuapu, he did not give us another religious identity to embrace. He actually gave us a racial spiritual identity, and that was coined as Nuwabi. And at this particular point in the nation, it was understood that our history, our culture, and our heritage was of Nubian origin, and that this would be the starting point of us propelling ourselves as a new race in which the Holy Tablets called us a new being, right? So it had all the elements necessary to pretty much further the vision of building and creating us as a new race. From this, most of those who took on this mission knew that this was our actual beginning because it represented the fact that we have everything we needed to be independent of all of those religions that for so many years we studied for the purpose of learning how and why we were placed under the spell of Leviathan. With a sacred text, our own language, and a flag, we can begin our very own schools and bring other non-ether beings to our sacred way of life. Therefore, the identity of a Nuwaubian represented completion of the learning of how to defend oneself, called psychic self-defense, from alien religions, the spirit forces of alien religions, and their names. Unfortunately, the master teacher was incarcerated, and this led to a few issues concerning the way of life and the path that we should be on. Nuwaubian versus Sabian. As previously explained, that the master teacher, Dr. Malachi Z. York, went to federal prison during the school of Nuwaubians. Therefore, we of the Imperial Order deny and reject any school after the Nuwaubian school and deem it to be unauthentic as it was not sanctioned by the master teacher while he was free. Now, I know a lot of people are going to have a lot of discrepancies with this particular slide, but my point is valid. We are rational thinking beings. Nuwaubians are taught to question everything. We know that from the Nuwaubian school of thought all the way back to the Ansar Law school of thought, our master teacher walked with us. He sanctioned these things. There is no true valid proof that the master teacher sanctioned for us to be Sabians. And I'm going to explain in slides to come why we see it that way. Now, I will say this. We of the Imperial Order see the Sabians as our brothers and sisters. If that's what path they choose to follow, then that's them. But for as the people who are standing under the umbrella of the imperial order, we do not subscribe to the Sabian way because we have no factual basis to base whether or not that was actually sanctioned by the master teacher or created by some unknown individual or group of individuals with their own agenda. So that keeps us safe in our own world or our own mind, spiritually and mentally, that we're doing the right thing according to what we know that the master teacher himself has sanctioned. The imperial order was formed out of the previously mentioned rejection and as a way to preserve the main elements of our Nuwaubian way of life and culture, namely our sacred identity, Nuwaubian, our sacred language called Nuwaubiya, Nubic or Nuwabic, our sacred spiritual science, Nuapu, our sacred flag, the Nubi Manif, and our sacred text, the Holy Tablets. So if you really look at it, and if you really, understand what it is that I am conveying in this particular PowerPoint, all I'm saying is that with the things that we know that the master teacher taught from Nuwaubian school of thought all the way back to the Ansar school of thought, Nuwaubian was the actual final or last thing that the master teacher sanctioned. And these are the elements that we were given to uphold and carry on based on those teachings. So these are the fundamental teachings that we stand on and the elements that we seek to uphold in the name of our master teacher, Baba Yanun. Sabian doctrine cannot be verified as coming from the master teacher's mouth. We do not accept confirmation coming in the form of a letter that the master teacher so-called wrote, nor do we accept someone else saying he said it, etc. Therefore, it must be rejected as a false doctrine created by those within the community and not by the master teacher himself. Again, we have no way to actually verify that the master teacher actually sanctioned for us to do that. And most people within inside of the nation, especially the newcomers, they never met the master teacher. They only know him through books, stories, and probably YouTube channels, internet. They don't know his handwriting. So if someone was to come and say, hey, the master teacher sent the letter to this brother or this sister, and it seems that if these brothers and sisters that so-called receive this information from him has a certain level of respect, I think that them saying that they receive some type of sanction is only accepted because of who they are, not necessarily that the people can verify that this is fact, that the master teacher sent this down. So it could be, for example, a brother or sister that was really close with the master teacher, that everybody knows that had communication with the master teacher. And if they came and said the master teacher said anything, most people would actually accept it without verifying it, simply because we have no way of verifying it. The master teacher is incarcerated in an underground federal penitentiary. There's no way to verify whether or not whoever is bringing this information from him was actually, the master teacher or the person that's actually bringing the information. So again, us under the umbrella of the imperial order, we stay on the safe side and we actually practice the fundamentals of the teaching and uphold the elements that we know the master teacher sanctioned when he was out here. Nuapu. The imperial order does not use the term Wusabat to describe the culture, doctrine, philosophy, beliefs, and practices its members adhere to, but rather we affectionately use the term Nuapu to describe the cultural beliefs, practices, doctrine, philosophy, and ideology as it is practiced and taught within the imperial order. We use this term to separate ourselves from the Sabians of today and to separate ourselves structurally as well. The imperial order. So in other words, we of the imperial order are a more evolved breed with a new leadership, which is none other than myself. And we have a more systematic way to disseminate the teachings of sound right reasoning. And we add the systematic foundation called Tanweeb to it. And we do this so that it's not confusing to grasp. Because sometimes if you're not careful when you're reading certain scrolls or certain information, especially I know a lot of people who've come to me that did not have people to actually explain the information, like I said before, in a comprehensive way. And so that's what we actually aim to advocate, a more concise and comprehensive way of explaining the fundamental teachings and practices of actually being a Nuwapian. Because if you're studying something that you're actually confused about, then you truly don't know it. And if you truly don't know it, then it's almost impossible for you to actually become it and live it and implement it or institute it in your thinking, your actions, and the way that you speak. You're supposed to be able to think, speak, and act like a Nuwapian. And with doing that consistently, emotionally, you should change. So then you should learn to feel, right, like a Nuwapian. That's not always the case when people are purchasing scrolls and reading them, and they're left with inconsistent teachers disseminating the teachings of the master teacher. So, and I'm not gonna sit here and claim that it's everybody, because it's not everybody. So I don't want to. I'm a very humble person. I don't want to come across as arrogant. I'm just speaking the facts right now. We know that the Nuwapian doctrine was the last thing that was sanctioned by the master teacher himself. We know that we heard the words Nuwabian come out of his mouth. We heard the words Nubic or Nuwabik come out of his mouth. We heard the word Nuapu come out of his mouth. I've yet to hear anything with Pop's voice on it that uses the term Wusabat, that uses the term Sabian, that uses the term Mispatia. I've not seen it by any. So if anyone has that um, form of evidence, please, I would like to actually view it. Other than that, I'm just going off of the fact of being a very loyal student and almost like a son, because um, I was raised by the master teacher. So I'm not going to allow his greatness to be overthrown if I can help it. Tanweeb. Tanweeb is a word from the Nuwapic language, formed from the three-part verb noon, wow, and bath, which is the Arabic alphabet for it, or in English, NWB, which is the same three-part verb found in the words Nuwabian, Nuwabic, and Nuwabu. The prefix ta denotes a state of, or in a state of, or it can also signify a word that ends in the suffix ation, such as creation, which is formed from the word create. Therefore, the word tanweeb can mean in a state of sound right reason, or it literally can mean Nuwabianization. It also can mean non-ether liberation. Now, the word that we call the foundation is this word here, tanweeb. And if you look at the Nuwapic, the teacher's guide to the Nuwabian language, you'll see that the master teacher says that an Asian word in that particular dialect is ista, ISTA, added to the front of the word. However, in the Nubic and the Arabic, which Nubic descends from Arabic, because Nubic was nothing more than the dialect that we of the Ansar Allah community created when we formed our own dialect off of learning the Arabic from the Arabic teachers that Pops imported over here to actually have us learn fluent Arabic. In that dialect, TA is used to signify an Asian word, or it can be in the state of. For example, if you take the word or the three-part verb fa, sin, and ra, which is FSR, you'll get the word fasor, which means to explain. But when you use the TA prefix and put it at the beginning of the F, and you use the double E to put between the S and the R, you get tafsir, which means explanation, right? And this is what the in the Islam that they use to describe the actual exegesis or the critical explanation at the bottom part of the verses within inside of the Kitab, the Quran. So the TA suffix, the TA prefix is a prefix that describes a word with the Asian or in the state of, and because the NWB is what also forms Nuwabu, and we know that Nuwabu means sound right reason, this could mean in a state of sound right reason. As well as we know that the NWB forms the word called Nupu, right? which means nine ether, it also can mean nine ether liberation. And we also know that it forms the word, the NWB forms the word Nuwaubian. And if you put an Asian on it, it would be Nuwaubianization. So this became the term that we use to describe the foundation of Nuapu. Nuwaubianization. Nuwaubianization is the action of making a person or thing Nuwaubian in character or nationality. It also can mean the influence of Nuwaubian culture and business on other countries and the process of developing and promoting Nuwapic into a person's education system, government, and media in order to replace a form of language that was enforced in a nation due to colonization. So when we use the term Nuwaubianization, what we mean is inculcating the basic teachings in our language inside of a newcomer, right? And the code of conduct in order to make them Nuwaubian like, in order to make them like us, and so that they would be able to properly think, speak, and act like a Nuwaubian. Because that's what it's about. It's about inculcating the teachings within inside of ourselves so that we become the living, the living proof of the actual way of life. If we can't implement the teachings in our thinking, our speech, and our actions, then it's less likely that we're going to become Nuwapians, because a Nuwaubian thinks a certain kind of way, we speak a certain kind of way, and according to what we've been taught through our code of conduct and etiquette, we act a certain kind of way. Tanweeb is a system of the essential parts of the doctrine of sound right reasoning, which derives from the Holy Tablets. So everything you guys are going to see, for the most part, is directly coming out of the Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, the Ghost Ether tablet. And I've included the verses inside of the actual presentation so that you all get a gist of where Tanweeb comes from, what it means, and how we actually practice it. More specifically, chapter 10, tablet 12, Ghost Ether. The Ghost Ether tablet was the primary source when forming our teaching system, for it contains all that was necessary as far as learning the essentials of the doctrine and our purpose as Nuwapians, which our purpose is also clearly outlined in this tablet as well. Therefore, the essentials or basics of the doctrine that any practitioner must know in order to qualify as being a part of the Nuwaubian way of life can all be found in the system called Tanweeb, which was derived from the Ghost Ether tablet within the Holy Tablets. The Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 187 to 189. It states, if knowledge is not to be confusing and thereby ineffective, it must be in sequence. Verse 188 says, knowledge received must be in organized sequence in order to put the mind in order and unity. Verse 189 states, organize and put your minds in unity in order enough to qualify for your own effective spiritual science called Nuapu. So in this particular chapter, tablet, and verses of the Holy Tablet, it clearly tells us that if knowledge is not given in sequence, it will be ineffective and confusing. So there must be an organized way or systematic way to give our information where it precedes in steps and it is concise and comprehensive. By these verses, we conclude that knowledge must be given in a format which proceeds in steps. We are also told that if it is not given in steps, that it would make the knowledge confusing and render it ineffective to the student. We are also told to qualify people, which means that people must be asked to meet standards and requirements in order to be a part of our sacred culture. We do this by ordering individuals to learn the basic foundation and fundamentals of our way of life. For example, the purpose of the doctrine of sound right reasoning is to counteract the spell of Leviathan. This is the basic, and according to the master teacher himself, was the sole reason for the existence of the spiritual science of sound right reasoning. Meaning, if there was no such thing as the spell, then there would have been no need for the existence of the spiritual science of sound right reasoning. The spiritual origin of the black race is non-ether. This too is basic doctrine. Right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding, sound right reasoning, and sound right action are what we need to break the spell. All of these are the essentials of the doctrine. Tanweeb is basically the system which explains all of the basics of Nuapu and puts them in a chronological order so that it may be simply understood and taught in a more basic and simplistic way. Once this new teaching system of Nuapu came into play, we no longer teach Nuapu outside of a systematic format. We use the umbrella term the Imperial Order as a way to separate our method of teaching and practicing, and as well as to declare our independence as an independent Nuwaubian organization. Most individuals do not know that the Holy Tablets contains all that is needed to live the total Nuwaubian way of life. The Imperial Order belief is that the Holy Tablets is the primary source of information of a Nuwaubian, and the Sephiroth, the scrolls, are the secondary source of information. Therefore, our goal is to live strictly by the Holy Tablets. It teaches us the spiritual, political, social, and economic aspects of our way of life. We teach in the Imperial Order that the Sephiroth, which is the Nuapic term for scrolls, are the exegesis of the Holy Tablets. Therefore, we use the scrolls to explain the Holy Tablets, but we live by the Holy Tablets. And exegesis is just a word that means a critical explanation of a sacred text. It's also, as the word I gave you before, tafsir, explanation. Tafsir also means exegesis. Nuwaubian. The reason we of the Imperial Order use the sacred racial spiritual term Nuwaubian to refer to ourselves is based on it being the only identity that properly defines our racial and spiritual origin. Defining Nuwaubian. The term Nuwaubian can be broken down to its most basic form, which is the three-part verb NWB. It is this three-part verb that forms all of the words such as Nuwaubian, Nuwabia, Nuwabic, and Nuwaubu, as well as Nubian, Nubia, Nubic, and Nupu. From the three-part verb NWB, it can mean prophecy, it can mean of color inclining to black and brown, to sprout or to germinate, and non-ether. Therefore, when vowels are added, this three-part verb changes to mean a plethora of things. Noob, non-ether. Nuwaubian, non-ether being. Those who sprouted and germinated the planet. Nubians of the diaspora. Those who live according to the prophecies. Nuwaubu, sound right reason, right knowledge, right wisdom, right understanding, sound right action. Nuwabic, language of the Nuwaubians, language of the non-ether beings, language of the Nubians. Tanweeb, Nuwaubianization, the state of sound right reasoning, mental and physical liberation from adverse forces, non-ether liberation. All of the above words are formed from the three-part verb NWB, and all of the above words are very important to our culture. I want you guys to study this chart to know the meanings of these words so that you can better understand what these words are actually conveying. This combined makes up the system called Tanweeb. Each knowledge system works to teach newcomers our primary message, beliefs, and practices, as well as our works to qualify newcomers to be a part of our way of life, as we were told to do in the Holy Tablets. I will explain each teaching within the system of Tanweeb and use verses from the Holy Tablets to factually back up each concept. It must be noted that none of these concepts are actually new, but rather, Nuwaubu has had no formal starting point, nor did it have a method of teaching the essential beliefs to a newcomer. It was based on reading books, any book for that matter, written by the master teacher, and a student's learning began with that process. However, over the years, even as our nation changed, I noticed that there were a lot of reoccurring thread within the doctrine that no matter what school we were in, these words, phrases, and teachings still remain the same. So what this slide is basically saying is, irregardless to what school we were in, there always remained a common thread of what the master teacher kept saying. One is the spell of Leviathan, or Kingu, or Aman. We are nine ether beings, and that we come from this spiritual substance. The spiritual substance was responsible for the creation of the universe, then personifying itself in flesh and blood as a physical being in the form of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people. So there were always these common threads of knowledge that Pops always would basically keep reiterating, irregardless of what school of thought we were in, all the way up until the creation of the holy tablets and after. And therefore, these would be the most common basic elements of Nuwaubian doctrine. Also, it must be understood that our nation metamorphosed from Islam, and Islam itself has a learning structure. But as Nuwaubians, when we regained our culture, it was open-ended in the fact that it did not have a foundation outlined as the fundamentals or essentials of our doctrine. When we we were still just reading scrolls without any rhyme or reason. Therefore, after careful study of the holy tablets, I discovered the passages where the master teacher had laid the foundation for the creation of a foundation and the blueprint to do it. Therefore, Tanweeb was born and became the primary learning method of the Imperial order. The outline of the system of Tanweeb. Now, in this slide, these are all of the basic elements within inside of the structure. We have el-istahda, which is the declaration, el-aqida, the creed, el-arba'at naya hagat, the four noble facts, el-khasafar naya sabul, the fivefold noble path, el-talad rakuzat, the three aspects, el-khasat kanrahat, the five principles, el-sated madupat, the six articles. Now, I'll say this before I move on to the next slide. Basically, the only thing I did was use Nuwaubic words and phrases to describe the beliefs and practices that we as Nuwaubians have already accepted and embraced. I've created nothing new. I just put our language to it because everything was being given to us in English. Unless you actually were born and raised in the community when we were children, again, we spoke Arabic. And from there, it was the Nubic. And then from there, it evolved to Nuwaubic. But by the time Nuwaubic came, we were not in tabernacle living anymore. And more people on the outside of the community was not really learning the language fluently, nor was the system of the knowledge placed within inside of the actual language. So again, the only thing I did was take the Nuwaubic language and title the actual concepts that we have already learned to actually embrace and accept as Nuwaubian people. Section 2, Lesson 2, Learning the Declaration. A declaration is a belief or fact that is publicly made known by those who believe. Therefore, the istahda is our belief in the fact that dark-skinned, woolly-haired people were created by non-ether. Therefore, we are its physical manifestation. The purpose of the istahda is to publicly make our belief in the oneness of non-ether, the spiritual substance, and dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, the physical manifestation of the spiritual substance, non-ether, known. There are two clauses in the declaration. The first clause of the declaration states, La insa ilal nub, which means no dark-skinned, woolly-haired people exist except by way of non-ether, right? So this first clause is stating that we acknowledge and accept that non-ether is the spiritual substance that created the black race. Over here to the left, you'll see the second clause, which is wala farida lahum. And this second clause states that non-ether, the substance, is not a separate entity from its physical manifestation, non-ether in human form. Therefore, they are one and the same in two different forms. So in our declaration, and as I move on with the slides, you'll see exactly why and how that came about, we're basically declaring that we are non-ether beings in the physical form, but that we are still the same as non-ether, even though there is a spiritual aspect of it. So, la nu wala farida lahum, what it actually would be interpreted as is no dark-skinned, woolly-haired people would exist if non-ether did not create them. Wala farida lahum is, and they are not divisible. You can't divide us. You can't say non-ether, the spiritual substance, is separated from non-ether, the physical form of human beings. We are one and the same. In conclusion, the literal meaning and translation of the declaration is below. Lan nu, no dark-skinned, woolly-haired people would exist if non-ether did not create them. Wala farida lahum, and they are not divisible. Thus, in the imperial order, we say I and non-ether are one. So this is viewed as the first thing that we teach newcomers in the imperial order, that they must embrace. You must embrace non-ether because you are a non-ether being, and the holy tablets back this up. So a declaration is a belief or fact that is publicly made known by those who believe. The first clause is stating that we acknowledge and accept that non-ether is a spiritual substance that created the black race and the universe. And the second clause states that non-ether, the substance, is not a separate entity from its physical manifestation, which is the Nuwaubian black race. Therefore, they are one and the same in two different forms. How the Holy Tablets inspired the Nuwaubian Declaration. The Declaration was inspired by the Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verse 435, which states, and it will be disclosed when the minds of all woolly-haired people with the ability to identify themselves with non-ether have been qualified. And that time is now, right now, if accepted and diligently studied as well as read. So the reason we formed the declaration is from this verse. We understand that we were expected to be able to identify with the spiritual substance which created us, called non-ether, according to chapter 10, tablet 12, verse 435 in the Holy Tablets. Therefore, the declaration was our oath of allegiance to our divinity, and the secret was that our divinity was incorporated in our sacred identity, Nuwaubian, as well as our acknowledgement that we were created by the most potent power in all the boundless universes. So as you can see, we were taught in the Holy Tablets that that we must identify ourselves with non-ether. And to identify yourself is to consider yourself literally as the same thing, right? Just like manifestation literally means the same thing in another form. And so with the declaration, this is our way of basically declaring that we identify ourselves with non-ether and we see ourselves as the physical manifestation of non-ether. And the term Nuwaubian, I broke that down as far as when you go research the word Nupu, and that Nupu comes from the same three-part verb NWB, and Nupu means non-ether, then Nuwaubian also can mean non-ether being. Therefore, every time that we identify ourselves as a Nuwaubian, we are identifying ourselves as non-ether beings. Section 3, Lesson 3, Learning Al-Aqidah, the Creed. The creed is a science, right? So I wrote a letter to the believers because once when we pass the stage of the declaration, El Istahda, we come into a different version of the same knowledge. So the creed is basically backing up the actual declaration. And the reason why I wrote this letter called the letter to the believers, it was kind of sort of to prep them for the information in the creed to come. So the creed is a science. It is the key to understanding our origin, our structure, our evolution, and our eternal existence. It is the key to building a new world, new consciousness, a perfect being, a supreme being. The belief in the creed must be expressed in the willingness to do in the name of it. Devotion is its rule, and nothing good comes to those who betray it. The creed is in our blood, it's in our DNA, it is our reason for being. The creed is the true ruler of the imperial order, and our Authority Messiah, the Nur Tanaya al Mahdi, is its guardian, for he represents the first sacrifice for it. The creed is believed in, it is worshipped, it lives in the hearts of all true imperial NUWAUBIANS, and is the most infallible aspect of our life. No one is above it. All must profess belief in it and be willing to die for it. With this energy infused in it, the authority has decreed it as the source of life for all NUWAUBIANS of the imperial order. The creed is the passport to the next world and is the injunction of our divine right to rule in this world. Through the creed, we embrace our superiority as a race. Is the manifestation of the divine itself, and our breed is the most superior of its kind. The imperial creed encourages the pursuit of glory by establishing our supremacy over all non-NUWAUBIANS in the known world. I believe, therefore, for the creed, I do. In this letter, what I'm actually trying to convey is the belief in the creed alone, coming straight out of the holy tablets, is one of the most powerfulest bodies of information when you really analyze it. And there is nothing written in any other doctrines that actually can match it, because the master teacher was the best, and I'm going to keep promoting that. That was God on earth to us in the Nuwaubian community. So the creed, based on the words of the master teacher, was some of the most profound information that was ever given to the Nuwaubian community, and it has not been contested up to this day. So let's move forward. Al-Aqidah, the Imperial Creed. So when we actually do the creed, we do it in question and answer. So this is the first statement of belief in the creed, and it'll go to the second, to the third, to the fourth, to the fifth, and you'll get the gist of the message that the creed is actually explaining, as well as for those of you all who've been studying and are familiar with the holy tablets, you'll see the science and where all this stuff is actually stemming from. Again, I didn't make this up. This is straight out of the holy tablets. All I did was take Nuwaubic words and actually define or explain these particular principles or concepts, so that we would be actually incorporating our language in our foundation. So what is this first statement of belief in the Imperial Creed? The answer is, we believe that 9 ether beings created the universes in their etheric form that personified themselves as flesh and blood beings. Right? This is the first creed. Then we ask, what does it mean? Meaning, in our primeval state, we existed in the form of floating gases called plasma, brought into existence from non-ether consciousness, who performed the first act of thought that caused creation to unfold in the form of us, the various gods and goddesses who formed the company of gods out of the one entity and became the cosmic forces, principles, and laws of the universe. What is its scientific statement of proof? The magnetic currents that flow through the etheric substance is what causes carbon atoms to be attracted to the etheric form. As the vibrations of the etheric form starts to slow up, the carbon atoms gain the ability to stick to the atoms of the etheric form, and this forms the flesh of the physical body. This is how non-ether beings personify themselves as flesh and blood beings. So as you can see in the first creed, it basically outlines that we believe that non-ether beings created the universe in their etheric form, and they personify themselves as flesh and blood beings. This is all in chapter 1, El-Istakhlaq, the creation tablet of the holy tablet. And then it goes on to give you the scientific statement of proof, right? As well as, what does that mean when we say we believe that they created the universes in their etheric form that personified themselves as flesh and blood beings? All of this actually comes from the holy tablet. There's none of these answers that you cannot find either in the living soul chapter or the creation tablet or the various other different tablets where all of this information was compiled into this systematic format. So we're going to move on to the next creed. What is the second statement of the Imperial Creed? We believe that dark-skinned, woolly-haired people are the physical manifestation of non-ether. What does it mean? Meaning, non-ether is the chemical formula that produces black or brown skin and woolly haired people. Manifestation means the same thing in another form. What is his scientific statement of proof? Flame color is influenced by the elements being burnt, and non-ether is the combination of all existing gases of nature. Therefore, when non-ether gases burn, they produce an unfathomably high temperature, which results in the fastest frequencies of electromagnetic radiation being produced, specifically UVB and ultraviolet rays, which causes melanogenesis at the highest level in our DNA. So in this particular creed, we're basically describing how we are the physical manifestation of non-ether. And given the scientific proof, now this is basic scientific proof. Of course, it can go more in depth. However, this is just like a basic explanation to get your minds kind of moving and studying the holy tablets so that you can actually learn how we became what we became from this particular spiritual substance, non-ether, and why we are so adamant about teaching the creed as one of the most powerfulest aspects of our foundation. What is the third statement of belief in the Imperial Creed? We believe that non-ether is the mental power and chemical combination of all existing gases of nature, and that nothing anywhere can be as powerful as all existing gases and chemicals of nature. Therefore, non-ether is the most potent power in all the boundless universes. What does it mean? Meaning that non-ether has the mental capacity and functions as an meaning that non-ether has mental capacity and functions as an intelligent substance with the ability to reason, being as though it is made up of all existing gases. It is thus made up of all existing information. Potent in this case means the most chemically capable. Therefore, it has the ability to form any kind of chemical combination, making it the most intelligent. So from here, family, what we're basically trying to elaborate on is the fact of everything in existence is made up of gases. And we know that gases combine in different chemical combinations to form different things. If non-ether is all existing gases of nature, the reason why nothing can be as powerful as all existing gases of nature is because these particular entities, these gases, actually have all of the information within inside of it to be able to create the various different things that we see that are formed from chemical combinations in nature. Therefore, if non-ether is all existing gases of nature, that means non-ether holds all information. Information is anything that can be detected by the physical senses in a simple way of understanding it, because everything that can be made up of gases or chemical combinations that can be detected by the physical senses. And we know that our senses work as electrical transducers to actually convert natural phenomena into electric signals so that we can be able to see, hear, feel, touch, and so on and so forth, and use even some of the higher senses. And potent, when you actually look the word up, it means the most chemically capable. That's why the master teacher taught us that non-ether is the most potent power in all the boundless universes, because it's the most chemically capable, because there is no chemical combination that non-ether cannot produce in order to bring into existence anything that is made up of a chemical combination. What is the scientific statement of proof? The forces of non-ether, called black forces, created life in the water first. Hydrocarbons were present in the waters. Hydrocarbon is a simple methane gas which only contains hydrogen and carbon. The word hydrogen itself means hydro, or water, and carbo means charcoal or black. So these black gases of non-ether are the celestial origin of NUWAUBIANS. What is the fourth statement of belief in the Imperial Creed? We believe that NUWAUBIAN is a sacred identity and that it is the original racial identity of the black race, because it is the only identity that properly defines the racial spiritual origin of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people. And we've already explained the spiritual definition of NUWAUBIAN, non-ether being, and we've also explained the racial, ethnic meaning of NUWAUBIAN, being of Nubian people. And there is no other term or identity that properly describes us in totality like this particular identity. This is why we have the imperial order definitely embrace with a very high level of affection the actual racial spiritual identity or sacred identity Nuwabian. What does it mean? Meaning that Nuwabian is a holy identity because it defines us scientifically as gods, being that non-ether is the spiritual substance and creator of the universe, and the sacred name Nuwabian means non-ether beings. What is its scientific statement of proof? The word Nuwabian is a modified form of the word Nupu, which both come from the root word Nu, which is the ancient Nubic term for non-ether, and the suffix "ian" means being or people. Thus, the name Nuwabian literally means non-ether being. The Holy Tablets, chapter 19, tablet 6, verses 187 and 188, it states, new words was introduced and people grabbed onto them quickly and started calling themselves Nuwabians instead of black this or black that or Afro this or Afro that. Verse 188 states, you are Nuwabians. You are originally from Nubia. So in this particular chapter, tablet, and verses within inside of the Holy Tablets, the master teacher clearly identifies us as Nuwabians. He clearly identifies where Nuwabians come from. Now, mind you, Nuwabian is definitely a modified word form of the word Nubian. And I've explained this in certain posts as well as certain other videos that a Nuwabian and a Nubian is the same. The only difference is a Nubian is a mixed Nubian that still lives in most cases in the African homeland, whereas Nuwabians are mixed with different races, but they live in the diaspora, or we live in the diaspora. So that's really the clearest difference between Nuwabian and Nubian. What is the fifth statement of belief in the Imperial Creed? We believe that we must establish a paradise on earth in the form of our own society, built on self and kind as the superior power, and working together as a family to obtain the money, power, and resources necessary for our survival and well-being. This is also stated in the Holy Tablets, chapter 10, when it says that we must embrace, that when we embrace our own, or when we embrace the way of the Anunnaki, then we see ourselves as a superior power, as opposed to embracing Mohammedanism or Islam or Hinduism or Christianity. What does it mean? Meaning that we believe in the law of submergence and that we must be submerged into the environment of what we are being taught in order to truly become it. And that in that environment, group economics is the key to building our wealth and raising our standard of living to an earthly paradise. What is its scientific statement of proof? The application of group economics within all Nuwaubian society, combined with proper thinking and proper conduct, will give us the ability to produce a socially superior standard of living for all Nuwaubians of the Imperial Order. The Holy Tablet backs up the Fifth Creed. So down here you'll see on the left where I wrote the Holy Tablet supports the previous creed, as well as in chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 171 and 172. So down here it reads, the Holy Tablets chapter 10, tablet 12, 171 to 172 states, so the males must awaken the women with right knowledge and get them on the side of liberation mentally, spiritually, physically, and sexually by guiding them right and refusing to be so free with their sexual power. Verse 172 states, then build a culture protective and an economic foundation for your women and children in your own communities. So in this particular verse, the master teacher is outlining that we, the males, being the leaders of the community, are supposed to take the right knowledge to the women. And when we put a proper system together to give them proper protection and guiding them right, they'll be on the side of liberation mentally, spiritually, physically, and sexually. And that then with that, we're supposed to go build a culture, go build a society protective and an economic foundation for these women and children in communities that are ran by us. So over here to the right, I gave another example, backing up the fifth creed, the Holy Tablets, chapter 19, tablet 6, verses 259 through 260. So it says, the Holy Tablets, chapter 19, tablet 6, verses 259 to 260, it states, our mission has obtained all its assets through sacrificing. Without the aid of outside funds, we've established many businesses within our community structure. So this is the master teacher actually telling us his own experience of getting the brothers and sisters in the community to work together and sacrificing so that we can be able to economically establish businesses within our own community structure, as opposed to letting races of other people, or other races rather, come inside of our community and basically suck our community dry of the finances that we work hard for, but then they put their children through college and they, upgrade their standard of living, and they go and take that money and they're able to better take care of their own people within their own race, but they're getting all of our resources and all of our funds to do so. So this is just two verses. There's multiple verses in the Holy Tablets that outlines what we're supposed to be doing to build our own paradise on earth, brothers and sisters. It really is. And I think that the Holy Tablets need to be the focal point of study. The doctrine of submergence. So now, the Holy Tablets, chapter 19, tablet 6, verse 281 says, and I quote, and the information that we're being taught, believing that you must be submerged into the environment of what you're being taught fully was completed. The above verse out of the Holy Tablets outlined a historical fact of our teaching, which was we must be submerged into the environment of what we're being taught. And this led to our communal living style called tabernacle living. So again, family, all of these things are within inside of the Holy Tablets. Nothing that I'm saying I'm making up. I can literally go through the Holy Tablets and give you verse after verse after verse to prove my point about our foundation of Nuapu and how we're supposed to actually be disseminating these teachings, according to what the master teacher himself said as well as did. Section 4, lesson 4, learning the Arbat Naya Hagat, which translates as the Four Noble Facts. El Arbat Naya Hagat explained, the first step to learn El Arbat Naya Hagat, translated in English as the Four Noble Facts, is to understand that they are four types of experiences. Once the Four Noble Facts are understood, Nahas, an awakening takes place and enlightenment is achieved. Zom, which means the spell of Leviathan, has four aspects, and considering that the Four Noble Facts are actually just an outline of those four aspects, it is important that one who is studying meditate on what these four aspects are imparting. El Arbat Naya Hagat, the Four Noble Facts outlined. So in this slide, brothers and sisters, I'm going to outline the four aspects of the Four Noble Facts. So if you look here on the right, where it starts off as the nature of Zom, we know that Zom is a Nuwaubic word that comes from the three-part word ZLM, which in Nuwaubic we can say Zalum, which means to ignore, and Zom is like spiritual ignorance, racial blindness. Therefore, Zom is a word that we represent in our dialect of Nuwaubic, the Nuwabia, as spell of Leviathan, or spell of spiritual ignorance, racial blindness, or to ignore the facts. So the spell has a nature, it has an origin, a way to break it, and the path that we use to break it. So let's start with the nature of Zom. The nature of Zom, its nature is psychological and behavioral, meaning it actually affects the mind and the behaviors. The origin of Zom states that it originates from Luciferian controlled spiritual, secular, and racial miseducation. The breaking of Zom states that it's broken once one is actually able to deny and reject alien religion, and the path that leads to mental and physical liberation from adverse forces caused by Zom is the fivefold noble path, which is the method used to break Zom. So let's get into the Four Noble Facts. The actual Four Noble Facts are done through question and answers, like most of this system. And the reason why we put it in question and answer format is because, for one, that's always been the tone of the teaching method of the master teacher through the scrolls. They have always been question and answer. And for two, it helps an individual who is receiving the information reason with it a lot better. What is the first fact in the Four Noble Facts? The answer is Zom. What does it state? The fact that Zom exists. It exists as a psychobehavioral antibioexomatic conditioning of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, causing them to be in mental and physical bondage to adverse forces, which causes them to reflexively think, speak, and act illogical and unreasonable. So in this particular concept, what's being explained is that, first of all, Zom is a psychobehavioral antibioexomatic conditioning of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people. Now, let's actually break down what we mean by psychobehavioral antibioexomatic. When we say psycho, we're talking about the mind or the thinking. When we say behavioral, we think about the actions or conduct. When we say anti means to go against. And when we say bio, it's short for biological. And axiomatic is a naturally stated law of nature. So an axiom would be something like, what goes up must come down. As above, so below. Those are what you call axioms that pretty much are naturally stated laws that is accepted based on the actual the actual science that can be described that upholds it. For example, we know gravity pulls things down under normal conditions, that is. So when we say what goes up must come down, we're basing that on, in the presence of gravity, this will always stand to be a fact. All right, so that's a conditioning. So when we actually simplify psychobehavioral antibioexomatic conditioning, what we are saying is thinking and conduct that goes against the laws of nature. And this is what the spell actually does to us as a people. Basic examples can be given with that. For example, eating pork. If we're taught that this causes certain types of diseases within our body, right? And that the makeup of the pig and the makeup of our body chemically does not corroborate in a way that we can actually live a healthy life by eating those things, by someone telling us that it's okay to eat it due to the fact that if we pray over it, that is blessed, then that is a form of psychobehavioral antibioexomatic conditioning that falls in a behavioral antibioexomatic realm, where it is conduct that's going against the laws of nature, because we're going against the biological laws of nature by putting something in our body that's toxic. And with the doctrines of religion, they have trained us to think, speak, and act illogical. We think illogical when we embrace a doctrine that actually goes against sound right reasoning. And for us to start trying to impart that to someone else, then we are speaking illogical. And for us to act upon it means that we're acting illogical and unreasonable. So in this particular fact, the first fact, what we're stating is that the first fact is Zom. And the fact that it actually exists, and what it exists as, a psychobehavioral antibioexomatic conditioning of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, causing them to be in mental and physical bondage to adverse forces. So let's break down mental and physical bondage to adverse forces. Mental bondage is basically being psychologically enslaved to information that is illogical or unreasonable. And physical bondage is being physically bound or physically enslaved to other beings that are not of our race, that keep us enslaved through technological means, right? Or what you call technological enforcers, like guns, bombs, the threat of violence. An adverse force is any person, place, or thing or idea that hinders the proper survival and well-being of Nuwaubian culture. So, in a nutshell, this is basically outlining that the spell actually does exist and what it actually exists as. The breakdown. The first aspect of the Four Noble Facts outlines exactly what Zom is and what it causes. When you look at the way religion has conditioned us to think and compare it to what the Bible actually says, you will understand how we are in bondage to adverse forces, as well as how we are conditioned to reflexively think, speak, and act illogical and unreasonable based on quoting illogically outlined verses. What is the second fact in the Four Noble Facts? The answer is Aslunulzom. Aslunulzom. And Aslunulzom means the origin of the spell. What does it state? The fact that the spell originates from Luciferian controlled spiritual, secular, and racial miseducation of dark-skinned, woolly-haired people, which caused spiritual ignorance and racial blindness, causing the black race to be spiritually, culturally, and racially divided amongst themselves. This is self-explanatory, family, because when you look at how the spell actually originated, it was from, other races of people bringing us in this, when we were in the state of being Africans, pretty much their religion, and trying to teach us about their God and their image, and convince us that we could be saved by this particular book. In other cases, like for slavery being colonized, it was a threat because the slave master's God basically was upholding his particular position, and we looked at it as it was actually keeping us in the position that we were in. He was more superior than we were because obviously he was the one in control and the one that was instituting this slave mentality and these slave etiquettes and behavioral patterns in us that was making us less than ourselves. As well as once when we all started to choose different sides of these religious doctrines, we became divided amongst ourselves because now we don't see ourselves as one. We don't see ourselves as just one race of people. He's Christian, he's Muslim, he's this, she's that. And keep us divided because of these particular religious ideologies that we keep embracing does not enforce the unity of Black culture or Nuwaubian culture, and nor does it actually keep us culturally as one, as a cohesive whole. It definitely has us separated. So again, the term Asalumul means origin of the spell. And this is where it originates. The breakdown. In the second fact of the Four Noble Facts, it informs us that the Luciferians are the ones who miseducated us, meaning they've given us the fundamental misconceptions about spirituality, secular, and racial education. The Holy Tablets, chapter 1, tablet 2, verse 38, it states, "These he has pardoned and has appointed one of them, Haleshi, to be the governor, and he granted them a new law called religion. It was other than Nuapu's sound right reasoning." And the Holy Tablets 19, tablet 6, verse 100, it states, "We were deprived of a proper education, then called dumb and stupid." So what was happening was these verses are outlining how there was a certain time to whereas, as in the first tablet, it was stating how basically Lucifer, or what they call Zuin, was given false education and appointing people to actually cast this spell. In the second Holy Tablet verse, it was talking about, the Black race in America at, a certain point in history to whereas white people were, not only miseducating us, but then they were calling us names when we lived up to that miseducation. We were called dumb and we were called stupid. Nonetheless, our miseducation literally came from these beings that actually wanted us in an inferior position so that they could rule over us and use technological enforcers to keep us enslaved and colonized. What is the third fact in the Four Noble Facts? Kasorozom. The word is kasorozom, and that means breaking of the spell or to break the spell. What does it state? The fact that the spell is broken when all dark-skinned, woolly-haired people with the ability to identify themselves with non-ether are actually able to deny and reject all alien religions, the spirit forces of alien religion, and their names, and only identify themselves with non-ether. Refer to Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verse 435. The breakdown. The third fact in the Four Noble Facts informs us that we can break the spell, and that the spell is broken when we are actually able to deny and reject all alien religions, the spirit forces of alien religions, and their names that only identify with non-ether. For the sake of understanding, let's break down what the master teacher meant by a spell. Defining a spell. A spell is words uttered in a set formula that has a compelling, effective, and influential effect on the mind of the listener, and ultimately causes the mind to ignore the facts, as well as operate without logic and reasoning. Primarily, this is represented in NUWAUBU as religion. Remember, in the definition of a spell, the words must have a compelling, effective, and influential effect on the mind. Let's see how religion is compelling and effective. Now, over here in the left, you'll see religion is compelling, and then I break that down for you guys. And over here on the right, I have religion is effective, and I break that down. So let's start with religion is compelling. Because it uses force and coercion to get you to accept it and to be submissive and obedient to it by the threat of punishment. You will receive if you do not obey its unseen spirit force called God. Offering punishment breeds conformity, and to compel means to use force. Religion is effective because its doctrine has the power to control and produce a mental and emotional effect or result through the teachings about its spirit forces. Its spirit forces are God, the devil, Jesus, heaven, and hell. All of these concepts have been taught with an emotional attachment to them, mainly fear, fear of God, fear of hell, being God-fearing, etc. Thus, through these concepts, eventually develops the control of a person's feelings, which is what is meant by effective, and causes fear-induced attachment. Let's see how religion is influential. Religion is influential because it exerts power over the mind, behavior, and attitude of people by telling them that if they obey, they will receive an everlasting existence with the God they fear in a place called heaven. And they are taught stories to compare and have examples of the rewards of those who obeyed versus those who disobeyed and received punishment. This method becomes a strong influence on the actions of a person. Therefore, Nuapu teaches its students that based on the quality of education that we as a people have been given by religious and secular sources, our people have developed fundamental misconceptions of reality, which is the spell of Leviathan. So the spell is basically when you have a fundamental misconception of reality, and you're pretty much living in illusion and myth. In conclusion, the third fact is instructing us to deny and reject alien religion, which literally to deny alien religion means to verbally declare that it is untrue or not factual. And to reject alien religion, it is to refuse to accept it as one's own. And this we do by not practicing it, not allowing it to shape our thinking and behavior. Identifying with non-ether. When we identify with non-ether, that literally means that we consider ourselves the same thing in the physical form as the substance. And we reject being identified by any other identity other than Nuwaubian because it means non-ether being and signifies us as a black or brown skinned race with woolly hair. Calling ourselves Nuwaubian literally identifies us with non-ether, and the fact that this substance is just another form of us, making us the walking, talking universe. What is the fourth fact in the Four Noble Facts? El Sabu. What does it state? The fact that the path we must use to counteract Zom, which is the spell of Leviathan, and to achieve mental and physical liberation from adverse forces is El Chesed Farub Naya Sabu, the fivefold noble path. So, in order for us to actually achieve mental and physical liberation, which you'll see in later slides, is the actual purpose given to us in the Holy Tablets as Nuwaubians, we must actually put into practice what we call the Chesed Farug Naya Sabul, which means the fivefold noble path. The last fact in the Four Noble Facts is informing us that the path or method that we must use to counteract Zom, translated as the spell of Leviathan, and to achieve mental and physical liberation from adverse forces is by the practice of the El Chesed Farug Naya Sabul, which translates as the fivefold noble path. Let's analyze the term Leviathan. The word Leviathan breaks down into two parts, Levi and Athan. Levi means law or laws, and Athan means sin. Therefore, Leviathan literally means the laws of sin. To understand Leviathan, you must first understand the religious mythology of the devil and how that relates to ancient Mesopotamian mythology. It is said in religious mythology that the devil stands in the lake of fire called hell. The abyss, chaotic water, or lake of fire became known as hell in modern religious mythology and was deified as the ancient Mesopotamian deity named Suin or Zuin and Sin. Sin was considered Lord of Wisdom and a lunar deity associated with chaotic water. Breakdown of the symbolism. The lake of fire is where modern religions get the concept of hellfire. The fire, water, or flammable liquid combined with the symbolism associated with fire and water. In terms of the esoteric alchemical symbolism associated with information, fire was symbolic of information or knowledge, the sun, and water was symbolic of mythology or symbolism, mathematics, and the moon. That enables comprehension and use of information, wisdom. Thus, fire water, a lake of fire, or flammable liquid, would be a very potent and powerful form of mythology or symbolism, water, that could be ignited or used when combined with the right information, fire. This fire water was the symbolism and mythology or mathematic rationalism associated with logic and reason, requisite for problem solving, which problem solving, another way of seeing that inside of the spiritual world is liberation, because only reasonable thoughts and symbolism can be used and applied, whereas unreasonable thoughts, symbols, and hypotheses fail when put to the scientific test of experimentation. In conclusion, Leviathan literally means the laws of sin. And again, the ancient Mesopotamian deity Sin is a moon deity associated with water, and thus rationalism, because the moon and water in alchemical symbolism was associated with the rational part of the mind, rationalism. Therefore, the law of sin or Leviathan is the laws of the mind called logic and reason. The reason Leviathan, the devil, and hell has such negative connotations in religious mythology is because if an individual is unable to properly use the laws of the mind called logic and reason, then their life can be indeed a living hell. The need to use logic and reason to problem solve and conquer the devil is necessary for life. Not following the laws of the mind and being illogical and unreasonable will lead to the unfavorable circumstances that most people catch themselves in life when they're in that state of mind. To be illogical and unreasonable is the real meaning of committing a sin. So sin actually based on studying the Mesopotamian symbolisms of sin, Suin, Zuin, moon, have absolutely nothing to do with going against the God. It has everything to do with going against the laws of the mind, the mechanics of the mind, logic and reasoning. Y'all need to know that, family. The breakdown. Therefore, the spell of Leviathan is describing one that reasons nonsensibly, or the art of making one remove their logic from the equation when analyzing words that be they written or spoken. Adverse force defined. An adverse force is any person, place, or idea or thing that hinders or is detrimental to the proper survival and the well-being of self and kind and threatens the freedom of expression of Nuwaubian culture. Let's now look at the meaning of mental liberation. Mental liberation literally means to be psychologically freed from the false education that comes along with secular or public schools and alien religion. Mental liberation mentioned in the Holy Tablets. So this is also backed by the Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 122 through 125, which literally states, our purpose as Nuwaubians. It states, and I quote, "You must embrace a purpose and a plan, and must develop the power to execute the purpose and plan. Idleness and ignorance must play no part in the plan. You must take the plan and pursue the purpose. The purpose must be mental and physical liberation from adverse forces." So in chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 122 to 125, the master teacher definitely gave us a clear purpose. He told us how to embrace that purpose with a plan, what not to do, what cannot play a part in that plan or purpose, and how to take our plan and pursue the purpose. And so, with that being said, family, now you guys know what the purpose of the NUWAUBIANS are. It's mental and physical liberation from adverse forces. So, from these verses, it is clear as to what our purpose is as NUWAUBIANS. Section 5, Lesson 5. Learning the Chesed Farub Naya Sabu. So the Chesed Farub Naya Sabu translates as fivefold noble path. Okay, so here's the fivefold noble path outline. The fivefold noble path breaks down the five-part methodology used to counteract and break the spell of Leviathan. The 5 parts are as follows: Sahdahuth, which means right knowledge; Sahakundum, which means right wisdom; Sahtahum, which means right overstanding; Sahsabu, which means right reason or right reasoning; and Sah Istaskheg, which means right action. Again, family, all I did was take the Nuwaubic language and use it to describe the concepts and beliefs and practices that we have already learned to embrace. It's nothing new. And placed it in a question and answer format so that when imparting it to a person or newcomer or whomever, it is very concise and comprehensive for them to be able to catch on to, learn, and memorize. So let's go at it. What is the first fold of the fivefold noble path? Sahdahuth, which is right knowledge. What does it teach us to do? It teaches us to only accept information that is based on fact, that is, information that can be verified by one or more of 3 tests: experience, evidence, and reasoning. Why? Because we experience evidence and we use it to reason. What ability is developed by the practice of Sahdahuth, or right knowledge? The ability to be able to draw the correct conclusions in words about any phenomena detected with the senses and processed by the mind. Therefore, Sahdahuth develops right thinking. So with this, what you need to really focus on is we're turning right knowledge into action. And whenever you properly process information, because that's all Nuapu is Nuapu is literally scientific and mathematical method of information processing. And we know that the physical senses detect the information, and then the mind process that information, and then we are able to better understand what something is, how it is, and and so on and so forth. So right thinking is developed when that process is on point. And this is what Nuapu is trying to get us to reach in our pursuit of sound right reasoning, trying to become sound in our right in our reasoning. And of course, sound right reasoning, we all know, means unshakable facts and logic. So it's learning how to actually define something or basically process something and define it as either true or false. What is the second fold of the fivefold noble path? Sahakundum, which is right wisdom. What does it teach us to do? It teaches us to know how and when to use Sahdahuth, right knowledge. That is to know how and when to apply the fact. So right wisdom, or as we call it in Nuwaubic, Sahakundum, it teaches us to know how and when to apply the right knowledge. When do we apply this? When do we use this? Where do we use it? How do we use it? Right? These questions. What ability is developed by the practice of Sahakundum? The ability to be able to draw the correct conclusion in words about how and when sahdahuth, right knowledge, should be used. Therefore, sahakumdum, right wisdom, develops correct judgment. So this particular aspect is to create in us the ability to be able to properly judge after we properly conclude of something that we've observed, right? And I think that it's more simple than what we've been led to believe. But for some people, it may be complicated, and this is why the foundation is needed because there are more explanation. I'm just doing this particular PowerPoint as an introduction to Tanweeb, but I'm going to put out more PowerPoints on um, each individual concept so that we'll get a thorough understanding of it and more dialogue. So they'll be done in actual classes, live classes. What is the third fold of the fivefold noble path? Sahfahum, which is right overstanding. What does it teach us to do? It teaches us to develop the capacity and capability to completely comprehend the information that is received by the mind and to develop the ability to use it, reflect it, and transmit it in the intended way. What ability is developed by the practice of sahdahuth? The ability to use, reflect, and transmit sahdahuth, which is right knowledge, in the intended way. Therefore, sahdahuth develops correct comprehension, right? So when the information is received by the mind and we're comprehending it, we usually absorb it in a certain kind of way based on our reference point. If the information doesn't naturally come within inside of your reference point, here's where we need to do actual research because it's something that we're unfamiliar with. And again, more information come in contact with the senses, and it is processed by the mind. We make the determination as to what's right or wrong or correct or incorrect. And then by that process, we develop a strong sense of comprehending what it is that we've actually encountered in our endeavors of trying to actually absorb this or whatever information that we've actually taken the time to try to research or learn about. What is the fourth fold in the fivefold noble path? Sah sabu, which is right reason or right reasoning. Sah sabu. What does it teach us to do? It teaches us to develop the capacity and capability to properly analyze and synthesize information to bring about effective results and solutions. What ability is developed by the practice of sah sabu? The ability to present logically valid proofs and justifications to classify information as either true or false. So right reasoning helps us to either prove or justify that something is or isn't, right? It's that faculty of reasoning that allows us to deem this information as either true or false and be able to explain it or prove it. What is the fifth fold of the fivefold noble path? Sah istaskhai, right action. What does it teach us to do? It teaches us to develop proper conduct by the practice of sahdahuth and the NUWAUBIAN laws of Mat. That is to exercise a strict control over our thoughts, words, behaviors, and actions and emotions to bring about an efficiency of thoughts and productivity of action. Holy Tablets breakdown. In the Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 144 through 145, it states, the third step is controlling your various emotions and getting things done, accomplished through right knowledge. 145 says sound right reasoning and sound action. The Holy Tablets, chapter 10, 12, verses 131 through 132, it states, control your thinking with right knowledge, control of your physical activities, including your sexual activities. So in this particular, these particular verses, the master teacher is telling us that our emotions need to be controlled, and right knowledge needs to be to the forefront. And what that literally means is, just like in these presentations, a lot of people when they read this or listen to this, their emotions is going to get involved. But one thing you have to understand is that what I'm saying, I'm standing on as 100% fact because I'm backing it up. There's nothing that I've said in this presentation that in some way, shape, form, or fashion cannot be proven through the writings of the master teacher, be it the holy tablets or the various different scrolls. He's saying right here in tablet 12, chapter 10, verses 144 and 145, that the third step to power is controlling our various emotions and getting things accomplished through the right knowledge, sound right reasoning, and sound action. So in order for us to have sound action, we first must remove the reflexive use of our emotions based on us not wanting to actually process something that may go against our preconceived ideas or things that we've learned to accept as true that may not necessarily be true. So we have to watch that, family. We have to actually sit and take the time to ponder and absorb or use right overstanding to totally comprehend the information that's actually coming to us, and to be able to properly weigh it with everything that we have access to, so that we know what it is that's actually being said or disseminated to us. Just like in this presentation, there's nothing that I'm saying to you that pretty much I cannot go show and prove through the master teacher's writings. What ability is developed? The ability to conduct oneself as a non-ether being with proper conscious awareness and proper conscious moral judgment. The master teacher taught us that non-ether is conscious awareness and conscious moral judgment gases. So if we're made up of this effective spiritual substance, right, or this potent spiritual substance, then we have the ability to develop the same conscious awareness and conscious moral judgment. And once when we're able to conduct ourselves with the non-ether conscious awareness and conscious moral judgment, then we can actually take steps in being deities again. Section 6, Lesson 6, learning the Taled Rakuzat. Taled Rakuzat means the three aspects. Okay, so these are the three aspects outlined. Taktibu Dayun, which means denial and rejection of alien religion. Taktibu Kalal Shaduya wa Isumahum, denial and rejection of the spirit forces of alien religion and their names. And Taktibul Fak Zahuthet. Now, this is denial and rejection of false identity. So it's Taktibul Dayun, Taktibul Kalal Shaduyat wa Isumahum, Taktibul Fak Zahuthet. These are the three aspects of the NUWAUBIAN Foundation, the NUWAUBU Foundation. So let's get into it. These are the three aspects explained. The three aspects of Taktib represents the spiritual psychology aspect of Tanweeb's cognitive restructuring program. It is the aspect of Tanweeb that puts forth a practical program of deprogramming NUWAUBIANS from Zom. And as I stated in the previous slides, Zom is the term that we use for the spell of Leviathan, or spiritual ignorance, racial blindness. By training them to deny and reject the core aspects of Zom, it is a form of spiritual cognitive therapy. Its aim is to target the three primary aspects of alien religion and teach students of the Imperial Order how to practice, by way of their physical actions, how to deny and reject those aspects. We call this process Taktib. The Holy Tablets backs up the entire three aspects. The Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 133 to 137, it states, to elaborate a bit further on the first step to power mentioned in the previous paragraph, you must first pass the capability test. The capability test determines whether your mind is capable of growing in and with the new sun cycle, the revolutionary cycle. Verse 135 says, you have passed the capability test when you are able to actually deny and reject the alien religion, the spirit forces of alien religion. 136 says, and the names of their spirit forces, such as God. 137 says, the false Jesus, Lord, Christ, and Ghost. So all three of these aspects of the three aspects deal with the denial and rejection of alien religion, the spirit forces of alien religion, and their names. Now, in the second concept, Taktibu Kalal Shaduya wa Isumahum, that combined the spirit forces and their names. And the last one was the rejection of false identities, which I also gave the verse in chapter 10, tablet 12, concerning identifying ourselves with non-ether and not identifying ourselves with anything else other than that. That was already given, but I'm gonna give that verse again once when we get to the concept. Taktib explained. Taktibu Diyun is the first aspect of the three aspects, and it is the first aspect that we must seek liberation from, which is the alien religion itself. Taktib provides outlines of rejections of alien religion in the form of biblical, Torahic, and Quranic verses from the scriptures that represent Zom in some way, thus making Taktib a factologically based body of arguments of why we as NUWAUBIANS deny and reject specific information in alien religion. According to the principles of Taktib, rejections are classified as either the religious doctrine itself, the spirit forces of those religions, including the names used to refer to those spirit forces, and false racial spiritual identities. So, family, I want y'all to really, really, really take time to, even if you have to go over this information, again and again and again, I want you to thoroughly understand the message and where we're coming from with it. It's important that we know this stuff because this is the foundation. Therefore, there are a body of outline arguments of what exactly a NUWAUBIAN of the Imperial Order rejects and why. And the practice of this in NUWAUBU is called Taktib. So, before I go further, Taktib is a word that comes from the word Katib or Katu, which means to deny. And Taktib basically is like rejection of religious theology and practices, basically. So when we say that we are actually applying Taktib, what we're saying is we are actually physically rejecting and denying all of the things that come with alien religion that keeps us bound to the spell, or Zom, as we call the spell. So Taktibul Diyun, right? Denial and rejection of alien religion. That's what it means. Denial and rejection of alien religion, right? So when we deal with that, we must deal first with mental liberation from alien religion. Mental liberation from alien religion is to deny and reject the actual teachings within the religious doctrine itself, right? Physical liberation from alien religion is to physically refrain from the practice of its rites and rituals. To deny alien religion is to declare that the teachings are unfactual and untrue. To reject alien religion is to refuse to accept it as your own. So when we talk diyun, which is one word for religion, it could be pronounced dayun if it's spelled D-A-Y-U-N, but dayun or diyun is still the same word. In the Nuapic, you will see both. But to deny and reject alien religion, to deny it means that you declare that the teachings are unfactual and untrue. And to reject it is to refuse to accept it as your own. So I've written books on the subject with more in-depth information than these PowerPoints, which I do have an online bookstore. And so if anybody is looking to actually get more in-depth information, because it goes a little bit deeper in the books that I've written, with the verses from the Bible and information out of the scrolls that actually outlines specifically the things that we're rejecting and in what way do we reject it. We don't wear crosses. That's a part of Zom. That's a spell. We don't go into religious sanctuaries. That's a part of the spell. We don't practice religious rites and rituals. That is the spell, right? For me to take Holy Communion is definitely me being under the spell. That's Zom. We would consider that Zom, an act of Zom. So in the books that I've written, it actually outlines more in-depth information on how it's done. I'm going to be giving, again, live classes so that brothers and sisters that actually want to get a more in-depth understanding of Tanweeb, the foundation, they can have that. And if you need the books, I'll pretty much include that information inside of the group, and you guys can go to my online bookstore and order the books. So in this slide, we deal with Taktibul Kalal Shaduya wa Isumahum, which means denial and rejection of the spirit forces of alien religion and their names. So the mental liberation from the spirit forces of alien religion and their names is to deny and reject being psychologically and emotionally bound to the spirit forces of alien religion, which were brought about through religious propaganda, which caused religious induced fear of their spirit forces. Physical liberation explained. Physical liberation from the spirit forces of alien religion and their names is to refrain from any fear-induced submission or fear-induced obedience to those spirit forces. To deny the spirit forces of alien religion and their names is to declare that the spirit forces of alien religions called by those names are not non-ether spirit forces and are therefore alien. And to reject the spirit forces of alien religion and their names is to refuse to accept those spirit forces as one's own or creators of the Nuwaubian race. So in this particular aspect of denying the spirit forces of alien religion and their names, we do not see that these spirit forces are of non-ether, and therefore we reject them because they are six ether spirit forces and ghost spirit forces, and that falls in line with Leviathan. Note, the first thing that must be understood in order to clearly grasp the second aspect of Tanweeb is what is meant by the term spirit force. A spirit force is a force that influences the will of people. And what is meant by influence is literally the capacity to have an effect on the character, development, or behavior of someone or something, or the effect itself. So if these spirit forces in these religions, Jesus, God, Christ, etc., have an emotional or a psychological effect on the way that you think, speak, and act, then they're definitely influential and need to be discarded. Takdibul fact zahudat. This means denial and rejection of false identities. Okay, so mental liberation from false identities is to deny and reject all false racial, spiritual, or national identities such as Christian, African American, Muslim, Hebrew, etc. Physical liberation from false identities is the physical act of publicly referring to oneself by our sacred racial spiritual identity and original nationality, which properly defines us as non-ether beings. Denying false identities explained. To deny false identities is to declare that any racial spiritual identity that does not identify us as non-ether beings is in fact a false identity, and to reject false identities is to refuse to refer to oneself or to refuse to accept being referred to as any other thing than Nuwaubian. We do not allow ourselves to be called Christians. We do not allow ourselves to be called African Americans. We do not allow ourselves to be called Hebrew Israelites, or anything outside of Nuwaubian, because if you go back to the previous aspects of the foundation, we must identify ourselves with non-ether. This was already stated in the Holy Tablets. And the way that we identify ourselves with non-ether is by embracing our racial, spiritual, ethnic identity, Nuwaubian. So this is the only thing that we allow ourselves to be called. I don't care if you fill it out on an application. You're filling out an application. Basically, if they don't have other, then you don't check anything. Usually, if they have other, they have a line, and I always place Nuwaubian if I'm actually filling out for a job. And I encourage that everybody else does until we are recognized as our own race. The Holy Tablets, chapter 10, tablet 12, verses 434 to 435. Zahuthat explained. All right, so chapter 10, tablet 12, verse 434 states, Nuwaubu is the equalizer anywhere at any time. Verse 35 states, and it will be disclosed when the minds of all woolly-haired people with the ability to identify themselves with non-ether have been qualified, and that time is now, if accepted and diligently studied as well as read. So this verse is what I was previously speaking about in the Holy Tablets, whereas um, we are taught that pretty much the knowledge of non-ether will be disclosed when the minds of all woolly haired people with the ability to identify themselves with non-ether have been qualified. And you qualify by embracing that racial spiritual identity and identifying yourself with that, and by proudly declaring that in public. We let everyone know I am a Nuwaubian. That's what I am. I speak Nuwaubic, and my way of life is called NUWAUBU. And by doing that, on a mass level, it becomes clear to everyone external of our culture who we are, what we are, and where we come from. Note, when we call ourselves Nuwaubians, we are in reality calling ourselves deities. Also, Nuwaubian is not a religious identity, but rather it is a nationality, an ethnicity. Nuwaubian comes from the root word nu and is a derivative of the word nupu, which means non-ether. So nupu means non-ether. When you look at the spelling as well as weigh in the phonetics of it all, the form of the word that you see on the screen is only one form of the word, because it can be very well spelled Nubu or Nupu or Nuwpu, Nuwbu. And all of these words are different forms of the root word nub, Nuwb. And nupu means non-ether, and therefore being a derivative of the word Nuwaubian, and the coming from the root word nu, Nuwaubian definitely means non-ether being. So it describes us as deities. So it's like every time a person calls us Nuwaubian, if they're talking to a female, they're calling you a goddess, a non-ether goddess, or a goddess that was produced by the spiritual substance non-ether, and so on and so forth with the male. Whenever a male is called a Nuwaubian, they're basically saying that we are gods, or a male being that was produced by the spiritual substance non-ether. In conclusion, Takdeeb is the practice of denying and rejecting any thoughts, practices, actions, emotional ties, attachments to the spell of Leviathan, which is religion, and the state of ignorance that it breeds. Nuapu breeds a more intelligent, rational thinking being, as God is mind, and the mechanics of the mind are logic and reasoning, and Nuapu is the science of sound right reason.